The cameras were rolling. The audience was settled. Dr. Phil had just asked a simple question. But what happened next wasn't in the script. The guest sitting across from him didn't answer. She didn't move. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face in complete silence. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Dr. Phil raised his hand toward the production booth and said two words that stopped everything. Hold on. But what led to that moment? And what happened when the cameras stopped rolling that changed everything? Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Her name was Margaret. She was 42 years old. A mother of 3. And she had come to the Dr. Phil show because her family was falling apart. Not because of addiction. Not because of infidelity. But because of something quieter, more invisible, and far more devastating, grief that had turned into silence. 2 years earlier, Margaret had lost her youngest son, Daniel, in a car accident. He was 17. A senior in high school. 3 weeks before graduation. The kind of tragedy that shatters families, not just because of the loss itself, but because of what comes after, the inability to speak about it without breaking. And Margaret had stopped speaking. Her husband, Tom, sat beside her on stage. Their 2 surviving children, Emily and Jacob, were in the audience. They had tried everything. Therapy. Support groups. Family interventions. But Margaret had built a wall around her pain so high that no one could reach her anymore. She functioned. She cooked meals. She went to work. But she was not present. She was a ghost in her own life. Dr. Phil had opened the show with his usual directness. He looked at Margaret and asked, "When was the last time you said your son's name out loud?" Margaret stared at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. And then, without warning, tears began to fall. Not the kind of tears that come with sobs. Not the kind that shake your body. Just silent, steady streams running down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't look down. She just sat there, locked in place, as if her entire body had forgotten how to move. The audience held their breath. Tom reached for her hand, but she didn't take it. Dr. Phil leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from professional to deeply human. And then he did something he's only done a handful of times in 30 years of television. He stopped the show. "Hold on," he said, raising his hand toward the cameras. "Cut. Stop the tape." The red recording lights went dark. The crew froze. The audience remained completely silent, unsure of what was happening. This wasn't a commercial break. This wasn't a technical issue. This was Dr. Phil making a choice that no producer expected, to step out of the format and into the moment. He stood up slowly, walked over to Margaret, and knelt down beside her chair. He didn't speak right away. He just stayed there, at her level, waiting. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Phil spoke, but not in his usual commanding voice. This time, it was barely above a whisper. "Margaret," he said, "you don't have to say anything right now. But I need you to know something. Your family is here because they love you. And they're not asking you to be strong. They're asking you to be present." Margaret's shoulders began to shake. Still no sound. Just trembling. Dr. Phil reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. It wasn't a business card. It wasn't a resource pamphlet. It was a handwritten note. He placed it gently in her lap. "This is from your daughter," he said. "She wrote it last night. She was too afraid to give it to you herself because she thought it would hurt you more. But I think you need to read it." Margaret looked down at the card. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Emily, sitting in the audience, was openly crying now. Tom's jaw was clenched, trying to hold himself together. Margaret unfolded the note slowly, and as her eyes scanned the words, something inside her finally broke open. The note was simple. It read, "Mom, I miss Daniel too. But I also miss you. Please come back to us." And that's when Margaret did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She spoke. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, almost unrecognizable from disuse. "I'm so sorry I left you." Dr. Phil stayed kneeling beside her. "You didn't leave them, Margaret. You've been drowning. And that's not the same thing." Tom stood up from his chair and walked over to his wife. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just knelt down beside Dr. Phil and wrapped his arms around Margaret. And for the first time in 730 days she let herself be held. Emily and Jacob rushed from the audience onto the stage. The four of them collapsed into each other, a tangle of arms and tears and years of unspoken pain finally finding its way out. The audience was openly weeping now. Even some of the crew members had tears in their eyes. Dr. Phil stood up slowly, stepping back to give the family space, but his eyes never left them. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He walked over to the production team and said, "We're not airing this segment as is. We're cutting it. This family doesn't need to be entertainment. They need help." The executive producer looked at him in shock. "Phil, this is powerful television. People need to see this." Dr. Phil shook his head. "What people need to see is that some moments are more important than ratings. This family gave us their pain. The least we can do is give them their privacy." But then something unexpected happened. Margaret looked up from her family's embrace and said, "No. Dr. Phil, please. Air it. If one person watching this feels less alone, then it's worth it." Dr. Phil paused. He walked back over to her, crouched down again, and asked, "Are you sure?" Margaret nodded. "I've been silent for too long. Maybe it's time someone hears me." Dr. Phil placed his hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll tell your story the right way. Not as a spectacle, but as a message." The cameras turned back on. But this time, Dr. Phil didn't sit back down in his chair. He stayed standing beside the family. He looked directly into camera 2 and spoke, not as a TV host, but as a human being. "If you're watching this right now and you're carrying grief that you think no one understands, I want you to know something. Silence doesn't protect you. It isolates you. And isolation is where pain grows into something even bigger. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take one step towards someone who loves you and say, 'I need help.'" He turned back to Margaret. "This family is going to get that help. We've arranged for them to work with a grief counselor who specializes in traumatic loss. They're going to start family therapy tomorrow. And Margaret, you're not going to walk this path alone anymore." Margaret nodded, still holding her children close. Dr. Phil pulled out another card from his jacket pocket. This one was different. It had a phone number and a resource center name on it. "This is for anyone out there who needs it," he said, holding it up to the camera. "You don't have to wait until you're at your breaking point. You can reach out now." The show ended not with applause, but with silence. A different kind of silence than the one that had started the episode. This one wasn't heavy with pain. It was heavy with hope. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the taping ended, Dr. Phil did something else that wasn't part of the plan. He stayed. While the audience filed out, while the crew packed up equipment, he stayed with Margaret and her family for another hour. They sat in the green room, and for the first time, Margaret talked. She talked about Daniel. About his laugh. About his dreams. About the guilt she felt for still being alive when he wasn't. Dr. Phil listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing you can do. But there was something else that happened in that green room that nobody talks about. Something that shows the real Dr. Phil, the one who exists when the cameras aren't rolling. Tom, Margaret's husband, broke down. He had been holding it together for 2 years, being the strong one, the one who kept the family functioning while his wife drowned in grief. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet safety of that room, he finally let himself fall apart. "I didn't know how to help her," Tom said, his voice cracking. I tried everything. I read books. I called therapists. I begged her to talk to me. And nothing worked. I started to think that maybe she blamed me. Maybe she wished it had been me instead of Daniel. Dr. Phil put his hand on Tom's shoulder. Grief doesn't work on logic, Tom. It doesn't follow rules. Margaret wasn't choosing silence because she didn't love you. She was choosing silence because she didn't know how to exist in a world where her son didn't. Tom looked at his wife, who was now holding both of their children close. I just want my wife back, he whispered. She's right there, Dr. Phil said. She's been there the whole time. She was just lost. And now you're going to help her find her way back. Dr. Phil then did something he rarely does. He shared a piece of his own story. I've sat across from thousands of people in pain, he said. And I've learned that the ones who survive aren't the ones who are the strongest. They're the ones who are willing to be the most honest. Margaret was honest today. She let herself be seen. And that's the hardest thing any of us can do. He pulled out his phone and made a call right there in the green room. It wasn't to a producer. It wasn't to his assistant. It was to Dr. Frank Lawless, his longtime friend and psychological advisor. Within minutes, arrangements were made. Margaret would start intensive grief therapy the following week. The family would begin counseling together. And Dr. Phil would personally check in with them every month for the next year. This doesn't end when you walk out of this building, Dr. Phil told them. Healing isn't a one-day event. It's a process. And you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have days where it feels like you're back at square one. But you're not alone anymore. You have each other. And you have a team of people who are going to walk this path with you. 3 months later, the show received a letter. It was from Margaret. She wrote, Dr. Phil, I wanted you to know that we're doing better. It's not easy. Some days are still really hard. But we're talking now. We're remembering Daniel together instead of alone. And I'm learning that loving him doesn't mean I have to stop living. Thank you for stopping the cameras that day. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Dr. Phil keeps that letter in his office. Not framed on the wall. In his desk drawer. Because some stories aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be remembered. The episode aired with a warning at the beginning. This episode contains discussions of grief and loss. Viewer discretion is advised. But what it really contained was something far more important. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending you're okay. Margaret's story became one of the most watched episodes in Dr. Phil history. Not because of drama. Not because of conflict. But because of something far more universal. The recognition that pain doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about your strength. It doesn't care about your resilience. It just comes. And when it does, the only way through it is together. Dr. Phil has said many times that his job isn't to fix people. It's to help them see what they couldn't see before. And on that day, when he stopped the cameras and knelt beside a grieving mother, he didn't fix her grief. He just helped her see that she didn't have to carry it alone. The tissue box that sat on the table between them during that moment? Dr. Phil kept it. Not as a souvenir, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone isn't advice. It's presence. But the impact of that episode went far beyond Margaret's family. Within 48 hours of airing, the show's hotline received over 10,000 calls from people who had been silently grieving, who had been isolating themselves, who had been too afraid to ask for help. The episode became a catalyst for conversations that had been avoided for years in living rooms across the country. One viewer, a man named Robert from Ohio, wrote to the show, I lost my daughter 5 years ago. I haven't spoken her name since the funeral. After watching Margaret, I called my wife. We talked for 3 hours. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years. Thank you for showing us that we weren't alone. Another letter came from a therapist in Seattle. I've been treating grief for 20 years, and I've never seen anything affect my clients the way that episode did. 3 of my patients who had been stuck in their healing process for months finally had breakthroughs after watching it. Sometimes people need to see their pain reflected back to them before they can acknowledge it. Dr. Phil later said in an interview that the episode taught him something he hadn't fully understood in 3 decades of doing the show. We think television is about entertainment, about keeping people watching, about ratings and demographics. But sometimes, if you're willing to stop being a show and start being a mirror, you can actually change lives. That day with Margaret wasn't about making good TV. It was about making the right choice. And I'd make that same choice 1,000 times over. The handwritten note that Emily gave to her mother? Margaret had it framed. Not to display publicly, but to keep beside her bed. On the hardest days, when the grief feels overwhelming again, she reads it. Mom, I miss Daniel too. But I also miss you. Please come back to us. It reminds her that grief doesn't have to mean disconnection. That you can hold pain and love in the same heart at the same time. And presence, as it turns out, is what changes everything.